First, we have the circle, the sphere, the infinite possibility field. And it's unconscious. It's unconscious because it contains everything, and thus there's no distinction. When we break something into language through a system of distinctions, we create consciousness through contrast. And first there is the circle, the infinite possibility field. And then we divide the circle into a system of distinctions. Now, the best distinction patterns or systems are somewhat symmetrical. If we have to divide the whole into three parts, they might as well be most efficiently equal parts. If we divide the whole into these three parts, here, here, and here, you leave too much of the possibility field undiscovered or unconscious in its lack of mapping, its lack of distinction. So ideally, if you have a three-point system, you'll divide the whole into thirds. Once that's no longer adequate to navigate the different complexities of relationship, you'll divide the whole maybe into 4, maybe into 8, maybe into 16. You'll divide the whole into more and more complex systems through a process of distinctions which are somewhat arbitrary in nature. We could define space and then contrast objects, or we could define objects and contrast space. We could define I and then what is not I, or what is not I and what is I, or we could define we. I mean, you can break the circle down into as many complex variants based on the sophistication of your language, of your vocabulary. If it's a mathematical vocabulary, the highest you can count. And for practical terms, what you can remember. Now, all of us exist in multiple systems. We exist in an ecological system. We exist in a relational system. We exist in a relational system socially, physically, financially. But we exist in a variety of systems that are defined by their distinctions. For example, a banking relationship has a system that divides lenders and borrowers. That's not to say there couldn't be another system called the spanking system rather than the banking system that divided people in terms of who had ideas and who realized those ideas, or who produced money and made it into paper mache. But the systems that we evolve and the distinctions that we create out of those systems generally have something to do with perception of well-being, survival, security, love and belonging, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, movement towards sustainable well-being, moving away from chronic and unnecessary suffering. So there's usually a kernel in there that something about that system of thought, that way of dividing consciousness and reality, facilitated the movement towards well-being. But whatever the system is, much like the human body, the vast percentage of reality is space. Meaning the human body is 99% space because it is made of atoms that are 99% space. And And space. The solar system is 99% space because it's made up of objects that have far more space between them than the object takes up. And so we have a situation where this fractal pattern of 99% or thereabouts repeats in many ways. And one of the things that we can say is that 99% of all of the territory of reality doesn't fit into the system because we lack the observing and measuring device of most of the dimensions that are there. And within the dimensions that we do observe and measure, sound, sight, taste, smell, touch, imagination, feelings, these different dimensions upon which we can observe and measure reality, we have a very small bandwidth within which we can observe and measure. Meaning sound goes on infinitely in lower and lower waves, and it goes on infinitely in higher waves, but we can only observe and measure a very small part of the sound continuum, the sight continuum, the touch continuum. There is touch that is so slow that we wouldn't notice it over an entire lifetime as it made contact and differentiated itself again. It would not have the rhythm necessary to show up in our observing, measuring devices of sensation and touch. And so, mountains are moving so slow as they slowly descend into the valley. Mountain or ascend in the volcanic plates, that we don't see them moving, but they are. We just lack the ability to track movements that are that slow. So we see less than 1% of reality through a very narrow set of configurations. And we see through the lens of language. We become conscious of what we see through the lens of language. And let's say it's a 4-pointed system. Now, in order to relate to other people, to relate to the cult culture around us, we have to reference all this terrain of reality in and around those 4 distinctions. We have to reference them through those 4 distinctions because those are the 4 distinctions that are conscious. The rest is invisible. It doesn't show up. And so in order to make this dot of reality conscious, I've got to correlate it with this intersection point here. So using these distinctions and a little bit more of this and somewhat like that and flavored like this, I try and triangulate more and more of reality by using these 4 metrics of observing and measuring. And in doing so, I participate in an unconscious lie. And the unconscious lie says that the only thing that exists is the thing that I'm conscious of. It's a lie because while it's true for the observer, it's not true objectively. Objectively speaking, the observer at best sees 1%, and often 1% of 1% of 1% as you expand out into the infinite possibility field. The infinite possibility field emerges from the fact that you can refract the sphere an infinite number of ways. There's no limit because let's say when we look at time, for example, where we have this 12 o'clock and then the first second point. And it takes X amount of time for the second hand to move from 12 o'clock to the first second point. It takes 1 second. But as we all know, based on what's going on within us, that second feels longer or shorter, depending on our state of mind. And we also know from geometry that this second can become a half second, a quarter second, an eighth second, a 16th second, a 32 second, and this can go on infinite. You can split in half, in half, in half. There's no end that we've found. You know, we've reached subatomic particles. But that's taking a very arbitrary scale in all of creation, in all of reality, and it's the atom. So we made a big deal out of the atom because we tore it apart and threatened human existence and planetary existence in the process. So we're fixated on the atom. But the fact that we're now exploring subatomic particles, meaning we've spent most of human existence exploring particles that are bigger than atoms, and we discovered the atom, and now we're exploring particles that are smaller than the atom. What if we'd spent a large amount of existence and had split across, pulled apart molecules rather than atoms, or some other, or figured out how to harness the energy by tearing a planet apart rather than an atom apart? Then we would say, there's bigger than planetary particles, and then there's smaller than planetary particles. But we've fixated on the atom as this distinction point between subatomic particles and larger than atomic and atomic particles. And we're going smaller. And we've never reached an end where we've never found the fundamental building block where this was the smallest thing that ever was, nor have we ever found the biggest thing that ever was. First there was the Earth, then there was the solar system, then there was the galaxy, then there was the universe. Now there's the multiverse. Then there's the multidimensional multiverse. We have never found the end of continuums of scale. And you cannot find the end on a continuum of distinctions. You can refract the color spectrum into 256 million colors if you wish, and you can refract the color system into black and white to 2 or just 1. There's no end. And in terms of the diversity of distinction. But there is a limit to human consciousness as we experience it, which comes when we're asked to remember, for example, a new telephone number. Some of us can do that just fine. That's maybe 10 digits. But when it comes to remembering a 30-point number, a phone number or other number or account number that's 30 different numbers, just memorizing it, most of us can't do it. Because there's a limit to consciousness in the form of a limit of an ability to reliably hold a pattern of distinctions through which to view reality in a coherent and stable state. So we divide reality into systems, and then as cultures, and then as individuals, to relate to our culture, we have to tie everything that we experience and are interested into the distinctions used by our culture. And it's important to know that every system is a lie because every system omits most of the truth. And that's really, if we look at the different ways of lying, the truth is an accurate representation of all that is. That is the truth. So we start out with the sphere. Well, if we delete one piece of pie in the possibility field, then it is no longer the truth. If we delete 7%, now it is 93%. This, what remains, is 93% truth. Because the truth is an accurate, transparent representation of what is. Now, the truth is sacred in the intelligence continuum, intelligence being the efficiency with which energy is transformed into sustainable human well-being, which ripples out into the sustainable well-being of our host body, of our host solar system, of our host universe. An accurate portrayal of what is the starting point of any real relationship. Hate is meaningless if what you hate doesn't exist. Love is meaningless if what you love doesn't exist. What gives meaning to a relationship is that it's real. If you say, I love you to someone, but you don't, you're not speaking the truth of your apathy or whatever it is that's going there. And so you're not giving the whole or the real picture. So truth is the building block, is the data set, is the mathematics, the raw mathematics of what is. And you're not dealing with anything real unless you can perceive what you perceive truthfully. You delete 7% of the truth, you now have a 93% picture. Of course, most of us, 7% deletion would be ideal. Most of us do not understand 99% of the truth. So what we're fixating on is a little bit of light and a pattern of energy that has gone through so many filters, mentally, biologically, and otherwise, that there's almost nothing left. But it is something. When we take a piece of the truth and then we filter it so that everything, energy in this color, is blocked out, is not named. Because when you don't have a word for something, you block it out. So all of that energy is blocked out because there's no language for it. There's no paradigm for it. And then you apply this filter, and so you block out the bits that don't get in the filter. And then you apply this filter, and this filter, and this filter, and again, more disappears. And all that's left, much like a Michelangelo sculpture. Michelangelo, when asked how does he sculpt, he said he carves away everything that is not the sculpture, and his sculpture is what remains at the core. And it's true, his sculpture remains after he's carved everything else away. Our reality remains after we have carved 99% of it away through a variety of distinctions, through a variety of taboos, through varieties of habits, through a variety of filters. And there's a little piece of reality left at the end. And it's that piece of reality that is uniquely ours by deletion. You know, if you take a circle, and then you start deleting this bit and this bit and this bit, you just keep deleting 99% of it, you will have a unique shape that is what's left over after you've denied 99% of all that is. And that is what our reality is. Now, once we've decided that this is real and everything else isn't, in order for something to be real with us or with someone else, it has to show up within the paradigm. So, for example, materialism, the idea that anything that our senses, and this is quite a stretch because we only have 5 senses of the billions of senses that are possible. I mean, let's look at some of the billions of senses that are possible. A sense of right angles, meaning you could have a sense that every time you saw a right angle, a little number would go off in your head, and you would increase the total number of right angles you had observed over a day, over a week, over a lifetime. And you would see the total score of right angles. You'd say, there was another right angle, another one, 4 or 5, walk in this room, 10 right angles, then walk. That would be a sense. Now, because that particular sense doesn't enable us in this particular environment to survive, much more than not having the right angle sense, we don't have it. But let's imagine amongst the multiverse that there's a planet where everything that has a right angle is poisonous and everything that has a curve is healthy. Well, it would be very likely that some of the species on that world would develop a right angle and a curve sense, in the sense that they wouldn't see colors or textures or symmetries. They'd walk into a room and what would jump out is how many right angles are in this room, how many curves are in this room, and what do we do about it? And that's what their whole processing would be. And you'd say, well, what about smell? How does it smell? And they're like, we're not interested in smell because smell has nothing to do with reality, with survival security for them. It has something to do for us because our smell tells us if there's a fire. It tells us, if something is moldy or not moldy. Something smells good, if something's nearby. Our smell is helping us in this environment. But what about the environments in which the octaves at which we are observing the energy in the formation we call smell had no products? Meaning that everything that, quote, smelled on octaves way above the human nose to imagine. Well, then we would either redevelop a nose, etc., that could smell at those octaves, or we would just lose the capacity because the nose would never notice a distinction within the dimension of smell. So once our cult starts lying to us, because remember, the lie is the omission of some or all of the data. Once the cult starts lying to us by saying the only thing that really matters in life is what? Having babies and work, whatever it is, it's pretty simple. Money, get money, keep your health, have babies, be popular. What is the system? We have a variety of different systems in our cult. But in order to be noticed, in order to exist within a system, we have to show up within the paradigm of a system. You're a terrific mime, but if your parents are in the system that all that matters is money, and you're just getting a couple of $20 bills from panhandling as a mime, well, you don't matter as within the system of money. If suddenly as a mime you get a television deal, then you will matter because you fit into the system through which you are being observed and measured, which is a paradigm, a cult paradigm, a cultural paradigm. So, one of the things that I wanted to get to is the fact that when a system lies and says these are the metrics by which a man, a person, a business, a human being is measured, then in order to exist, to matter, which is a fundamental need for every human being, to be witnessed, to matter, to exist, in order to exist and to matter, one has to show up at one of these stations, and one has to turn the dial, has to affect the needle in one of these four distinctions. Otherwise, everything you do is meaningless. You have the scientific community. If it didn't happen repeatedly in a double-blind experiment out in a laboratory, they're not interested. Had the most amazing experience of your life? Was it in a laboratory? Did it have a double-blind? They're not interested. Anecdotal evidence, it's meaningless. It doesn't fit our little box, so we're not interested. Your partner has a little box called "What is love?" Now, if that little box is buying me flowers, and you fixed their car and you did this, it doesn't matter, because it didn't fit their little box called love, so you don't love them because you didn't do the thing that was in their little box. It doesn't exist. It's not real. So I do love you. I want you to feel loved. So what do I have to do? Well, you have to show up in this box. You have to do this thing, then don't do this thing, and then this thing, and then I will award you with the little prize that said you are a loving person. And so we train each other and ourselves constantly to matter within the systems that we participate in. I was listening to a retired police chief of Seattle today talk about his regrets about tear gassing the protesters at the W2O, after which he resigned. And he said what he did made perfect sense as a police officer, but not as a human being, not as within a larger constitutional framework. And so you have to first decide the systems through which you're going to measure success and failure and adjustment. And then once those decisions of what's relevant are made, we instinctively seek to elevate that which is measured within a given system. Within the United States and the system of capitalism, how much money does someone have is measured. And it is correlated with a perceived sense of success and value. And so you have a list of the most 400 richest people, the Forbes 400. And so success means you climbed up more on that list rather than went down. That's what success, if you're defining your value based on the digits in your bank account, you've got a scoring system. But meanwhile, there's no scoring system for the 400 kindest people in America, the 400 best mothers in America, the 400 best teachers in America. And what that's saying is that none of that is as important as how much money you have. So in order to matter, you have to show up with a certain amount in your bank account within this system. And people want and need to matter. And so they seek to show up within the systems in which they find themselves. However, the system is a lie, and the way that we show up within a system is a lie to correlate with the lie. In order to have a relationship with the cult lie, we tell personal lies. And we tell personal lies by emphasizing the bits of data that correlate and make sense within a given system, and not emphasizing this data over here, or this data over here, and this data over here, and this data over here. Because within the bandwidth, the limited bandwidth of attention and consciousness, if we draw attention to here and here, if the billionaire stockbroker draws too much attention to the fact that they like playing harmonica, well, then they lose rank within the system that's valuing on their financial return on investment, their performance as a hedge fund manager or whatever it is. Every system is a law. Every system is a lie. And in order to fit in and portray oneself favorably within any system, one lies by de-emphasizing all of the parts of who we are that go outside the system, that go into those terrains. If I was to talk to you about my hug and go on about it at great length, this feels so good, this hug, and you're going to tune out because you don't have a system that has a meaning for that word. And so it's not important to you. And what you're going to go back to is the system that you know. Well, how much money do you have? How much money do they have? What would I do if I had more money, right? That's all part of very, very interesting within a capitalist system. Very, very boring within a transcendent system. Very interesting in a reptilian system. Less so in an empathic system. So the truth is sacred, and it is endless, and it is transcendent, and it is multidimensional, and it is sacred because truth is the first step on the journey towards love. Do you love enough to care? Do you care enough to see? Do you see enough to understand? Do you understand enough to empathize? Do you empathize enough to attune? Do you attune enough to succeed at participating in relationship in such a way that another's survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, personal gifts and unique talents, bringing those talents out into the world abundantly and becoming a part of something bigger than themselves, amplifies? Do you love enough to attune in such a way that one's human needs blossom in a bloom of self-actualization, in a movement towards potential? Seeing, understanding, piecing patterns together. Data, perception, truth is the very first step, although caring enough to see, caring enough to understand. So you have caring moving into data, moving into awareness, moving into deeper caring, moving into a new field of data. Attunement is a data-driven process. If I'm a doctor and I want to support your survival, your security, etc., and I give you a medicine and you start bursting out in hives and screaming, if I care enough, I stop injecting that medicine. I find an antidote. I figure out a new hypothesis, and I take a new action, and then I measure the result. I attune and observe the impact. And so we have caring enough to see data, seeing enough to understand deeper data, understanding enough to attune, a feedback loop, caring enough to succeed with that attunement at realizing human potential, and measuring it, more data. So truth, perception, sight, into me you see, intimacy, is foundational to excellence, to intelligence, to science, to love, to ecology, to sustainability, to respect, to look and look again, to honor, to be changed by what one sees. I see you and I adjust my behavior to honor what I see of you. If you're throwing a rock at me, I honor you by moving out of the way. I see what you're doing, and I allow myself to be changed by what I see. If you're reaching out to shake my hand, I lean in. I adjust my behavior. I honor you by changing because you exist. I respect you. I look and look again and see who you are. I notice you. I pay attention. I take the most precious resource as an individual, my awareness, and I attend. I put that awareness on you so that I can adjust, so that I can honor, so that I can move towards a more symmetrical, multidimensional version of truth in which I honor who you are, in which I embrace the next step in the journey that begins with data, with awareness, with consciousness, which is to understand, emphasize, to love that which is seen.